September 9th, 2025, Charlotte, North Carolina. On that day, the city awoke to a headline that was impossible to ignore. An act of sudden violence had unfolded, not in a dark alley, not behind closed doors, but in the open inside a commuter train, crowded with ordinary people. The victim was a young woman, only 23 years old. She had come to the United States from Ukraine carrying the same hopes and ambitions that so many bring when they begin a new life in a new country. She boarded the train like countless others that evening, expecting nothing more than the hum of steel, the rhythm of stops, and the familiarity of an ordinary ride. Instead, she encountered a nightmare that changed everything. This was no hidden crime. It erupted in public in front of passengers who could never have imagined such a scene. A place designed to connect lives was transformed in seconds into a stage of fear. The attack tore through more than one life. It pierced the very sense of safety that commuters had always carried with them. Witnesses remember the chaos in fragments, the sudden scream that cut through the usual chatter, the sound of belongings clattering to the floor, the heavy slam of brakes as the train lurched to a halt. For those trapped inside, every heartbeat stretched into eternity. For those who heard the news later, one chilling thought rose above all others: if this could happen there in a space so ordinary, then where is safe? Emergency responders were fast. Within minutes, flashing lights painted the platform red and blue and trained hands moved to secure the scene. But even swift action cannot erase what was seen, what was felt, what was lost. For Charlotte, this was not only the death of a young woman, it was a shattering of the silent trust that allows people to board a train without fear. Now in the days that follow, the echoes linger. Passengers step onto platforms and glance around with unease. Parents hold their children closer. Conversations in offices and homes turn toward safety, toward fragility, toward the unsettling knowledge that violence can arrive without warning. A train carriage, once just a vessel of routine, has become a reminder of vulnerability. Tonight, as we open this coverage, we do so with respect for the victim and with recognition of the community that now carries this weight. The Charlotte train attack of September 9th is not just a headline. It is a wound in public confidence, a story that unsettles far beyond the station where it began. This is where we begin. Before we dive into this captivating story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. That way you won't miss any of our exclusive stories about power, wealth, and the hidden truths behind the world's most talked about figures. The victim of the Charlotte train attack was a 23-year-old woman from Ukraine. To the community that knew her, she was not just another passenger. She was a daughter, a friend, and a young immigrant who had come to the United States with hope in her heart. She had dreams of a brighter future, learning, working, and building a life far from the uncertainty she had left behind. Friends recall her determination, the way she spoke about wanting stability, independence, and a chance to create something lasting. For her, America was supposed to be a place where ambition was rewarded. Instead, her story ended in tragedy aboard a train she boarded with the same ordinary expectations as everyone else, simply to get home. The attack unfolded on a commuter train in Charlotte during a routine journey. The setting was public, filled with passengers who never expected their daily ride to be disrupted by violence. The steel of the train, the chatter of conversations, the hum of the tracks suddenly pierced by screams, panic, and the unmistakable chaos of fear. The suspect was no unknown figure. He carried with him a history that shocks even hardened officers. 14 prior arrests, 14 times taken into custody, questioned and recorded. Yet despite this record, he was free, not serving a sentence, not held in confinement, but released back into the community. On that September night, it was his freedom that collided with her vulnerability. This reality has left residents outraged and heartbroken. How, they ask, could a man with such a history walk freely onto a train? How could the system allow repeated offenses without consequence strong enough to prevent this? And why, after 14 encounters with justice, was there no barrier between him and a young woman who had sought safety in their city? The immediate response was swift. Police officers locked down the station, cordoning off the platform with flashing tape. Emergency medical crews rushed into the scene, moving with practiced urgency. Statements followed promising investigation and answers. But official words could not soften what had already been witnessed. Passengers recall the chaos with voices that still shake. One described the metallic screech of the brakes as the train shuddered to a stop, a sound that felt like desperation itself. Another remembered the clatter of bags and belongings abandoned on the floor, the sharp echo of shoes pounding against steel as people tried to push through doors that suddenly felt far too small. Some clung to strangers for comfort, gripping hands not out of familiarity, but survival, waiting for help to arrive. For those who lived it, the scene was unforgettable. The echo of screams bouncing off the train's walls, the panicked gasps of children pulled behind parents, the heavy silence that followed when officers finally stepped in. These details now ripple outward through the community, turning a private trauma into a shared grief. Charlotte is left not only with sorrow, but with questions that demand answers. This is no longer just a story of one man and one victim. It is a story about accountability, about the systems that failed to act, and about the haunting reality that violence can strike in the most ordinary of places. The victim's dreams will never be realized, but the shock she leaves behind lingers in the station where it happened, in the voices of those who witnessed it, and in a city now forced to confront both fear and responsibility. In the days following the attack, Charlotte has been forced to look inward. The city's residents, once accustomed to the steady rhythm of their public transit, now approach the train platform with a different posture. Conversations with commuters reveal a shared unease, an anxiety that has settled into the very act of boarding a train. One passenger described how she now grips the rail a little tighter and scans the faces around her before stepping onto a carriage. Another admitted that he has started avoiding the train entirely, choosing instead to drive to work, even though it adds an extra 40 minutes to his day. For parents, the fear runs deeper still. A mother clutching her child's backpack confessed that she no longer allows her teenage daughter to ride the train alone. "It feels like the rules have changed," she said. "What was once safe no longer feels safe." This shift in perception is not contained to individuals alone. Community organizations have stepped forward, voicing the concerns of residents and demanding change. Neighborhood associations, immigrant support groups, and local advocacy networks have all issued statements. Their words carry both grief and urgency: grief for the life lost and urgency for the protections they believe must follow. Public forums have been organized. Residents gather in church halls and community centers to speak out, to demand accountability from both local transit authorities and the justice system that allowed a repeat offender to walk freely. The conversation extends beyond one city block, one train, or one evening's tragedy. It has ignited a larger question about the safety of public transportation itself. For a system designed to bring people together to move thousands across a city every day, the prospect of violence feels like a betrayal of its very purpose. Riders are asking, how do we protect these shared spaces? How do we ensure that boarding a train does not mean stepping into uncertainty? At the heart of these questions lies another more troubling reality: the fear of repeat offenders. The knowledge that the suspect in this case had been arrested 14 times before has turned private fear into public outrage. People wonder aloud how many others walk the streets with similar histories. How many others slip through the cracks of a system that seems unable to prevent violence before it strikes again? Local leaders have acknowledged the pain and anger. Some have promised reforms, calls for stricter supervision, expanded safety measures in transit stations, and closer cooperation between police and community watch groups. Yet promises alone cannot erase the feeling that safety has been compromised. For many, the fear has already rooted itself. It colors every decision: whether to ride, whether to send a child to school on the train, whether to trust that a public space will remain truly public and truly safe. Charlotte today is a city in mourning, but also a city in debate. Its people are wrestling not only with grief, but with the fragile question of trust. Trust in the spaces they move through. Trust in the systems meant to protect them. And trust in the idea that what happened on September 9th does not have to happen again. For now, the echoes of that night continue, in voices lowered on platforms, in the cautious glances exchanged between strangers, in the headlines that still linger. The community impact of the Charlotte train attack is not measured only in statistics, but in the invisible weight carried by every passenger who steps aboard with hesitation. In the aftermath of the Charlotte train attack, the story did not remain only within the city's borders. It became part of the national conversation when former President Donald Trump addressed the tragedy during a speech delivered before a packed audience. His remarks drew attention not only to the case itself, but to broader concerns about violent crime across America's cities. He began by referencing the suspect directly using sharp and uncompromising language, calling him a deranged monster. Trump painted the attacker as a symbol of unchecked violence, a threat not just to one woman, but to society at large. His words were pointed, carrying both outrage and warning. Turning to the victim, Trump struck a somber note. He described her as a beautiful young woman with a bright future ahead of her, someone whose life was stolen in a moment of senseless brutality. His voice, captured on video, carried a mix of anger and sorrow. The acknowledgement was brief, but it underscored the human cost of a crime that had already become more than statistics or headlines. From there, Trump widened the lens. He used the Charlotte case as an example of what he called a growing crisis in American cities. He criticized what he described as weak policies, and he highlighted the fact that the suspect had been arrested 14 times before. To Trump, this was not just failure. It was proof of a system too lenient to stop repeat offenders. At one point, he declared, "For far too long, Americans have been forced to live with savage criminals set loose to prey on innocent people. This must end." The crowd responded with applause, underlining the emotional weight of his words. He cited statistics about crime rates in major cities, framing them as evidence of escalating danger. Numbers were woven into his speech: rises in violent assaults, increases in repeat offenses, intended to illustrate a pattern, not just a single tragedy. Each statistic was delivered as part of a larger argument that public safety in America's urban centers is under siege. Then came the familiar refrain, one that has marked many of Trump's campaign speeches: "We will make America safe again." It was both a promise and a rallying cry aimed at those who feel the fear of Charlotte could spread anywhere, to any train station, any public street, any community. A clip of his speech has circulated widely. In it, the emotion is evident: the mix of condemnation for the suspect, compassion for the victim, and determination to turn the case into a call for stronger action. The phrasing is blunt, the message direct: violent crime cannot be tolerated, and those who commit it must face consequences severe enough to prevent repetition. For his supporters, the words offered reassurance, a voice naming the fear they already felt and promising to confront it. For others, the speech raised questions about solutions, about policy, about how promises translate into practice. But regardless of politics, Trump's remarks ensured that the Charlotte train attack would no longer be seen only as a local tragedy. It had entered the national stage, framed as both symbol and warning. And so the story continues, not only in the memory of those who were there, but in the words now etched into the public record: a deranged monster, a beautiful young woman, and a commitment to make America safe again. To understand the significance of the Charlotte train attack, it must be placed within the larger landscape of violent crime in the United States. National statistics show that the country has experienced fluctuations over the last decade. According to FBI data, violent crime rose sharply during the pandemic years of 2020 and 2021, then began to decline in 2022 and 2023. Homicide rates, for example, fell in many regions, but overall levels of aggravated assault and repeat offenses remain stubbornly high. The picture is complex, one that resists simple headlines. Charlotte itself reflects this mixed reality. Compared to some larger metropolitan areas, its homicide rate is lower, but assaults and robberies continue to weigh heavily on residents. Local officials have noted that while certain crimes have dipped, the perception of danger remains strong, especially when public acts of violence, such as the stabbing on September 9th, dominate community memory. In cities like Chicago, New York, and Los Angeles, patterns show both progress and persistence. Policing reforms and targeted interventions have brought numbers down in some neighborhoods, while others remain deeply affected by violent crime. Experts argue that one of the most difficult challenges lies in addressing recidivism, the tendency of individuals with criminal records to reoffend. Studies reveal that many offenders cycle in and out of the justice system, often because short sentences, lack of rehabilitation programs, and gaps in supervision fail to break the pattern. Criminologists describe it as a revolving door: arrests are made, cases processed, yet without deeper intervention. The underlying causes, poverty, addiction, mental health struggles, remain unresolved. The suspect in Charlotte's case, with 14 prior arrests, is not an anomaly. He is a stark reminder of how systemic failures allow dangerous individuals to re-enter public life again and again. Experts note that predicting violence is notoriously difficult, but the absence of robust monitoring systems makes prevention even harder. At both local and national levels, policies have been introduced to tackle these issues. Some cities have invested in violence interruption programs, community-based initiatives, where trained mediators step in before conflicts escalate. Others have expanded access to mental health treatment within jails and probation services. On a national scale, federal grants have supported police departments in adopting new technologies from predictive analytics to expanded body camera programs. Yet the effectiveness of these measures remains debated. Supporters argue they increase accountability and deterrence, while critics warn of uneven implementation and the risk of widening mistrust between communities and law enforcement. In Charlotte, the attack has reignited calls for stronger oversight of repeat offenders. City leaders have promised to review bail policies and expand cooperation between courts, probation officers, and community organizations. Nationally, the case has been cited by politicians who argue for harsher sentencing laws, while others emphasize the need for rehabilitation rather than punishment alone. What emerges is a sobering truth: the issue of violent crime, and especially repeat violent crime, is not one that can be solved with a single policy or speech. It requires layers of response: law enforcement, social services, judicial reform, and community trust. The Charlotte tragedy is one story in a broader narrative, but it sharpens the urgency of the question: how can a nation balance accountability, fairness, and the right of its citizens to feel safe in the most ordinary of places? The aftermath of the Charlotte train attack did not end with official statements or political speeches. It spilled into the public square, where voices clashed, converged, and carried the debate into every corner of social life. Online platforms became arenas of grief, anger, and fierce argument as millions reacted not only to the crime itself, but to the words spoken afterward by Donald Trump. On social media, hashtags linked to Charlotte and the victim's name trended within hours of Trump's speech. Supporters of his message amplified his warning, agreeing with his description of the suspect as a deranged monster. Many echoed the call for harsher penalties, demanding stronger sentencing laws and tougher measures against repeat offenders. Comments filled timelines with phrases like, "Enough is enough," and "Make our streets safe again." For these voices, the tragedy was proof that leniency in the justice system had gone too far. Yet not all agreed. Another current of reaction emphasized reform rather than punishment. Advocates, scholars, and ordinary citizens pointed out that harsher laws alone may not break cycles of crime. They argued that the suspect's history, 14 prior arrests without meaningful intervention, revealed deeper flaws in the justice system. For them, the conversation was less about punishment and more about prevention. Better rehabilitation programs, expanded mental health care, and reforms to address systemic failures. In comment threads and live discussions, this divide became clear: one side urging strength, the other urging change. Beyond the digital debate, voices closest to the victim began to speak. Her family, still reeling from grief, released a statement through community leaders. Their words were simple but devastating: a plea for her life not to be reduced to politics, and a reminder that behind every headline is a person with dreams, memories, and loved ones left behind. They asked for justice, but they also asked for dignity, for their daughter to be remembered, not just as a symbol, but as herself. The Ukrainian community in the United States also responded with sorrow and solidarity. Vigils were organized in Charlotte and in cities with large Ukrainian populations. Blue and yellow candles lit the steps of churches, and prayers were spoken in both English and Ukrainian. Leaders of Ukrainian American groups expressed outrage that a young woman who had come seeking safety met such an end. They demanded accountability and highlighted the vulnerability of immigrants who often rely on public transportation to work, study, and survive in new surroundings. Local media captured these moments: families standing shoulder to shoulder at candlelight gatherings, voices trembling as they sang hymns of mourning, community leaders stepping forward to call for both justice and compassion. Their message was clear: this was not only a loss for one family, but a wound for a wider community already carrying the weight of displacement and war. The reactions, though varied, reveal a nation struggling with a question it has faced many times before: how to turn outrage into action and grief into change. Some argue for force, others for reform. Some demand immediate punishment, others long-term prevention. But all agree on one truth, that a 23-year-old woman's life was stolen in a place that should have been safe, and that such loss cannot be allowed to pass without reflection, without reckoning, and without resolve. The Charlotte train attack leaves behind more than shattered glass and yellow tape. It leaves a wound in the heart of a community and a story that resonates far beyond the city itself. At its center is a tragedy that cannot be softened. A young woman, only 23 years old, lost her life in a place that should have been ordinary and safe. She was not hidden in shadows nor caught in the anonymity of statistics. She was visible, hopeful, and present, and her final moments unfolded in full view of the public. This reality forces a confrontation with questions larger than one crime or one suspect. What does it mean to feel safe in daily life? For generations, public spaces, stations, trains, buses, sidewalks have been places where routine flows without thought. Yet when violence erupts in those very spaces, the sense of trust collapses. The Charlotte case compels us to ask how much confidence we place in the invisible promise of safety and how fragile that promise can be. It also casts light on the justice system itself. The suspect's long record, 14 prior arrests, has become a symbol of frustration. Citizens demand to know how someone with such a history could remain free to act again. This raises a larger question. Where does responsibility lie when repeat offenders walk unimpeded through public life? Is it the courts, the jails, the policies, or the gaps between them all? And most critically, how can those gaps be closed before another life is lost? Experts remind us that there are no easy answers. The balance between punishment and rehabilitation, accountability, and second chances has long been one of the justice system's most difficult challenges. But for the people of Charlotte, and for many across the country, that debate is no longer abstract. It is urgent, immediate, and deeply personal. As the investigation continues, voices on every side grow louder. Some demand harsher laws, others call for systemic reform. Some focus on the singular loss of a young woman, others on the broader structures that allowed it to happen. Yet behind the debates, one truth remains steady: a life was taken, and the community now carries the weight of that loss. And so we end with a message of both gravity and neutrality. The Charlotte case is still under investigation. New details will emerge and more answers will be demanded. But even as the facts continue to unfold, the event itself already stands as a warning. It is a reminder of how fragile safety can be and how urgent the task is to preserve it. The Charlotte attack has sounded an alarm about public safety. It has sparked fierce debate about how to confront crime and how to hold systems accountable. We will continue to follow this story, and we will bring updates as more information becomes available. We will continue to follow this story as the investigation unfolds, and we will bring you updates as new information becomes available. If you want to stay informed with reports like this, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us keep bringing you clear, timely, and reliable coverage.